No, let's start with the topic of today's conference, so change and opportunity. Change, as we've already heard this morning, change in the accessibility of information online, the way that prospective students engage with your institution, change in competition from online and international providers. Michael, let's start with you. Where's the opportunity amongst this change, and how is that feeding into your marketing strategy?
Well, we're all seeing the proliferation of channels and data and touch points, and while that's difficult to manage as it expands so quickly, it's an incredible opportunity to get deeper, to understand the prospects, to be able to segment them more finely, and to resonate with them through content marketing and other strategies in a one-on-one way. And ultimately, as we heard earlier from Chip, it's about outcomes. So the better that we can align, the better that we can determine that a prospect is aligned with our culture and the outcomes that we can provide, the better the ultimate outcome and the engagement even after graduation.
So what's changing then around how you go about measuring and tracking on outcomes?
Well, through marketing automation, being able to segment data down to persona levels through LinkedIn and other channels, being able to focus and rely more heavily on mobile as a device of choice, where our prospects live, and making investments in content marketing, doing probably 3 times more video, for example, than we've done last year or the year before. All those little adjustments and real-time learnings all help us to at least keep up, if not get out in front of some of the things that we'd otherwise have to react to.
Great. And Angela?
So I would agree with everything Michael mentions. There's a new tool every day. There's a new way to measure things. I think it's smart for everyone to start by figuring out how you're going to measure things. But one thing we've been trying to do more of with the proliferation of opportunities and options is to really know our lane, right? To figure out what it is that we're good at, so we don't jump at everything that sort of comes around, because there is something new every day. And that's tough sometimes, is to be the bearer of bad news when someone in your organization has found a new widget, and they bring it to your office, and it's a new shiny thing, and you have to tell them, remember, our organization is like this, and this widget doesn't fit our organization. And so it's being able to understand and analyze the tools, look at the different ways you can connect, but not be so enticed by the shiny item that you get pulled off course from the things that you are trying to measure, because then you just get a lot of white noise. And I think that gets to be very challenging.
Okay. Any thoughts?
Well, you might be able to tell from my white beard that I've been at this for a while. I come from a time when I first started in this industry, it was a very linear process. So when students wanted to find out about what you had to offer, they actually picked up a device called a telephone that was connected to a cord of some kind, and they called you and they asked you to send information, and that began a very linear process of responding through direct mail. Some of you might remember direct mail. These are ancient terms now, and all of this, I've been able to be here to witness the sort of sea change that's happened with the advent of technology platforms that allow us to directly connect with our customers, our students, in ways that we never could have before. And for a place like Harvard Business School, that's been really important, because for a long time we were sort of shrouded in mystery. And that worked for a while, actually, for Harvard Business School. What goes on behind those doors was there was a mystique about it. But that's no longer an option. And I think what we have realized is that social media is a great way for us to be able to connect with students, to allow the real voice of the institution to emerge to the surface, so that faculty and students can connect directly with each other in ways that they couldn't. I think that's been the biggest change, and we've really, it's been a learning process at the school to accept the fact that we need to embrace it, and to get comfortable being uncomfortable, for lack of a better way to put it. But it's been a welcome change.
Could you share an example of one of those uncomfortable conversations?
Oh, yeah. Well, not an uncomfortable conversation per se, but I'll tell you the dangers of social media, which I learned firsthand. We have in our dining hall, we have an international buffet offering each day, and it's themed to a different part of the world. And we had a student who was there on Israeli Day, and she was from Lebanon. And she went on Facebook. She had taken a picture of the menu, and she went on Facebook after lunch, and she posted a pretty pointed some might say snarky, comment about the fact that none of the items on that menu were actually from Israel. They were all from Northern Africa, or they had different roots. And I went online. Actually, I sent a private email to her saying, we didn't mean to offend. We're hoping that we can get better at this as we go on. We're trying to celebrate diversity. She asked if she could post that on her Facebook page, which I said, sure. I thought it was an innocuous enough thing. Within minutes after she posted that, I had a call from Al Jazeera Television asking me if this was my statement, if I had actually posted this. And I said yes, and they did a piece on it. And the following day, there was an op-ed addressed to me in the Jerusalem Times, an open letter to Brian Kenny in the Jerusalem Times. So within 48 hours, I had caused an international incident.
Well played.
Yeah.
Going to get you on the Mideast Peace Accord,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. That was uncomfortable.
Right. We didn't pre-plan that. I just asked for a story, and that's what Brian comes back with. So you mentioned the changing nature in the way that information is found and how important voices are in that discovery and selection process. Let's talk a bit about how that journey, and we all know that it's a long one in higher education for prospective students. How do you balance the short-term tactical need to drive high-quality bums on seats for programs versus a longer-term picture of the brand and the way that you're influencing people at different points in that journey, if there is such a thing? Michael?
I think that when you first start doing digital marketing, you can fall in love with cost per lead and cost per acquisition metrics, and it is amazing that we can tie web behavior or content interactions to budget. That's important, but it's a very short-term metric. The key that we find is that the better that we can connect the upper funnel data to the lower funnel, which are admissions metrics, like the inquiries and application starts and completes and enrollment and on, the more effective our marketing will be. And looking at that and looking at things like attribution that have a little bit more strategic view of what's actually going on versus independent data from who's clicked and what did it cost for that click is the first part of it. So it's about KPIs. And in terms of long-term brand building, sort of to tie into what Brian just said about the voice of the brand and handing over the mic to your students and your faculty and your research and all of that, that's really the best long-term brand building, most sustainable strategy, I think, for long-term brand building. And it's the most cost-effective, too.
And frankly, I think it's also the one that's most authentic. So if you're talking about shifts and changes in the market, there is nothing that can replace the movement that has come now on wanting to have the authentic understanding of the school. And so when I go out and tell people I'm a CMO at a university, they're always like, oh, so you do this recruiting part. And I said, so no, I just organize the many voices that do the recruiting part. Because ultimately, no one cares what I think about the program. They care about what the students think, what the faculty are researching, what the peers have gone through the program are saying. And so in order to harness that and to really be ready for it, you have to create a way for everyone to have an authentic narrative. And that's uncomfortable because some people's authentic narrative is not in the order you want it told, or it doesn't highlight enough about the process that you wanted, and you want to drive the car for them. But that's easily transparent to a prospective student and does more damage than good. And so, yes, your alumni will not tell their experience exactly the way you wanted them to. Your prospective student will not chronicle their visit to campus and show all the pretty pictures in the right order on Instagram, but they will show them and they will communicate it authentically, and that is where you stop being a marketer and start really being a choreographer. You start to put together a really compelling story that brand builds, but also tactically gets the butts in seats.
Yeah. Have you seen a piece where you went, oh, we couldn't have written that better ourselves? Was there something in particular that you went, this is gold?
Yeah, so we do a lot of student profiles, and we talk with students in advance and ask them to tell their story. And invariably, they all come back and say, what do you want me to say? Like, what do you want me to tell and write in my story? And what did you experience? And so we had a young man who was talking about his visit to campus and how he got lost coming to campus and getting through the buildings. And it's true, we have a ridiculously confusing building. There are like W's on the west wing, no E's on the east wing, there's no central entrance. We had a really cranky woman who used to run our front desk, who was like Roz, right, who used to run our front desk, who would always, sort of not necessarily the world's most welcoming part. And he chronicled this story about how it was there and how, as he was going through that, it got warmer and warmer the more people he touched. And it started out being something I was a little bit, cringeworthy and a little concerned about. But in the end, he got to explaining that when he got inside the school, there was no way he could get lost, that he found himself kind of in that environment. It's well written, but it was also very authentically about what you would have happen if you came to visit. So those kind of experiences you can't measure exactly, but you can't do without them either.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And I would say that we have raised a generation of people who, so I have 3 millennials at home. They are very savvy about when they're being marketed to. I mean, they can sniff it out from a distance. And I think we have started to recognize that authenticity is the key to the realm when it comes to creating a brand that's believable. And it's really the only way that you can live up to it, because if you put yourself out there in ways that aren't authentic, it's not sustainable over time. And in this age of social media where everybody basically has a bullhorn, it's going to be impossible to sustain an image that's not real.
And I think we're also fortunate that we work in an industry where each of you sit on mountains of great content. It's about making that relevant or finding the relevant audience for that. And as you said, choreographing the right message in front of the right audience at the right time. So let's talk a little about quality. It's a conversation that we were having before. And Michael, you already mentioned that moving those metrics away from a cost per click or even a lead and thinking about quality for each of you who have strong brand presence in market, how does that play into your marketing mix, the channels that you use, the technologies and the audiences that you look to reach?
Well, as the customers got more connected to everything, connected to channels and devices and platforms, and as we've seen the attention span go sub 8 seconds, right? And the average, I think 2/3 of millennials use ad blocking technologies. We kind of have to be everywhere at once, but we have to create a connected journey at the same time. We can't be fragmented just because they're hyper connected. And so mapping that journey and thinking about what the connection points between experiences are, tying those back into common content themes or offerings or stories, that's really the key. We can't just think about campaigns and buys. We have to think about the journey, and it's more difficult than ever because we're not it's not a straight line anymore, and it's usually connecting with the school is the last thing that happens. It's the silent shopping that goes on and all the social influence from people that you're not in control of that is really driving whether you're in their choice set or not.
Is there something that's worked particularly well in rethinking the way that you address for that quality outcome throughout the journey?
I think understanding how important personalization is and will become is really important, and we've been doing that for a couple of years, looking at different segments. Not only within we have 5 MBA programs across the online program, 3 EMBA programs, and the full-time. Those are segments, but then there are personas within those, and that's broken down based on a variety of characteristics, whether it's geography or career background, all these things. You have to start to get into the weeds on some of that to understand where they're likely to be influenced and what messages are going to resonate with them. If they're coming to change careers or to go deeper in their career, if they're coming to build quantitative capabilities, or they're coming to learn, if they're the engineer that needs to know the balance sheet, as Chip mentioned earlier, you kind of have to build a stream of content for them, and then marketing automation and data allows us to move those people in real time into that content flow.
Do you think there's been a tipping point in the balance of art and science in your marketing mix? You talk a lot about letting the numbers guide you and understand what will resonate.
coming from a creative background,
Okay.
first in product design and then at Macy's in creative services, there's a ton of intuition, especially as all our channels become more visual. Understanding that visual language is so important today and so compelling. There's no real ways to measure that in the same way that you can measure performance data on campaigns. So having really good skills within the team, within the partnerships that we have, is very important. And knowing how to use creativity and insight, not just the data, is part of maybe not the measurement at the end. It doesn't impact that as much, but it certainly impacts the planning and the strategies up front.
And I think Michael's spot on. We're talking about doing in higher ed what CPG companies have been doing for decades, right? It's kind of making a little bit more science to it. The difference is they sell toothpaste and we sell a $100,000 thing, right? And so the journeys are not going to look the same. The reality is people will choose for very different reasons. And like Michael mentions, it's not linear. It's also not one entrance or one door. So a career switcher has stories beneath that. Mm-hmm. Am I switching because I hate my job? Am I switching because I want more opportunities? Am I switching because I have a family or a life situation I need to change? And so very early on in the process, when I got to Emory, we started with a full segmentation, psychographic profiling, persona creation for all of the student body. And we do it often because those profiles change regularly. And there's so much nuance into why somebody chooses that it's difficult to know what part of the journey or the stream that you're going to put them down is going to convert them. But you do have to stick to your guns. You have to consistently know the part of your story that is compelling and hope that the persona sort of latches on to that at the right stage. And when they do, be able to lead them down the linear path, but not try to lead them down a path before they've reached out or before they've decided they want to be led.
I would also say that we're dealing with forces that are sort of larger than the industry that we're in. Mm-hmm. So if you look at brand business, it's really suffered a lot, particularly since the 2008 economic collapse. It's sort of leaked into the popular culture in movies like Margin Call and The Big Short. Mm-hmm. You know, the image of business is not good right now, and in many ways that's warranted. At the same time, it creates a dilemma for those of us who are trying to find not just applicants, but the right applicants to come into our programs. We think a lot about the students that aren't applying that we would like to have become part of our community that could add diversity and contribute to the community and the dialogue in meaningful ways. And we worry that that the image that business is going, the bad image that business has undergone right now, is preventing people from even thinking about that as a possibility. And there's no data that you can get easily that can it's the sentiment thing. So what Michael says about understanding the insights and not just thinking about the sort of the data that's in front of you, that's the really challenging part of understanding how you can move somebody to the next stage in the relationship.
So how much of your time are you thinking outside of this industry? Are you, we were talking last night about what conferences you pick and choose to go to. Those that are great and very industry specific like our own, versus if you're looking for cutting edge digital thought leadership, you're going to go to something outside of this space.
Yeah, I think that's really important. These kinds of gatherings are really important too. So there are groups that I get together with regularly that are peers of mine that work at other business schools, and we gather and we share, we commiserate. There's a little bit of group therapy aspect to it. In fact, we've got somebody here today in the group who's part of that group. At the same time, I also meet with people that do my job in private industry, so that I can understand better how are service organizations thinking about the way that they connect with clients, because they're very similar in the sense that a consultancy wants to create a long-term relationship. It's not a transactional thing. It's not a tube of toothpaste. It's a much higher end cost, and it's a much deeper relationship. I think there's a lot to be learned from connecting with people outside of this space and understanding how they're thinking about this.
You don't get a lot of opportunities to have an experience as rich as your education in higher education. Undergrad is particularly rich for a lot of reasons. Graduate, getting your MBA is a choice at a different stage, and you really do have to think about how you're going to communicate to a person what their next year, 2 years, 3 years, part-time executive experience is going to be. Business has taken a beating. The desire to love what you do has not. And it's really being able to explain that. My dean says it very well. When you go to law school, you can become a lawyer. You go to med school, you can become a doctor. You go to business school, you can really become anything. And truly being able to make that sing and resonate with the millennial audiences that are in our undergraduate, but also all of our graduate programs at this stage now, is really important in order to make sure that we're not just talking about business in a traditional sense. We're not just talking about iBankers and brand marketers, though we love them. We are talking about all the different ways you can have an entrepreneurial business mindset to do whatever you want to do. That's a difficult narrative to tell in a view book style, right? And so we've had to move away from the printed piece thing. This doesn't mean that people don't love them, but you move away from them because it is not linear. You don't turn the page and then see that you go from this to this to this. And it's scary, and people in your school and departments will feel like you have left parts out that are infinitely important to them. And you left them out because they're infinitely important to us. They're not infinitely important to us, right? And you have to be okay with the fact that prospects will circumvent your process if you make it too cumbersome. You just hope that they come back to you on the other end and desire to re-engage because the interest in what you provide holistically is greater than the sum of the parts you're trying to feed.
I think one of the other big benefits of being engaged and watching other industries is you recognize there's some things that higher ed's lagged in. We can learn a lot from one another, but I think we can learn as much or more from other industries that have been doing a lot of these things that we're talking about today for 5 or 6 or 7 years longer than we have. Looking at how obviously technology we're talking about today is a critical component of the ecosystem of marketing. That's something that we're sort of learning in real time. We're catching up with in general in higher education, but brands and other industries, other sectors have been out there. The other thing is you really learn about great partnerships and great vendors as well, and things that you can differentiate between a core competency that you have or want to develop in-house, but something that really makes sense to develop a strategic partnership. Chip talked about the partnership with 2U at Kenan-Flagler, and yeah, we could have gone out and started taping classrooms and made a go of it, but the smart move was to partner with an organization with a vision and retain core competencies and the brand building and all the things that are going to fuel both sides of that relationship.
Great. So what are some of the big bets you're making in the coming year ahead that you're willing to share, and how it relates to your marketing?
So I wouldn't say we're making any big financial bets. If you look programmatically at the bets the school has made in the past 5 years under our dean at the Noria, there have been big bets in terms of changing the curriculum, again, in the interest of relevancy, and really understanding what it is employers are looking for when our students enter the workforce. So we were founded over a century ago. We've been sort of, the case method has been our DNA ever since we've been in existence, and that's what we're best known for. But a few years ago, we introduced a program called the Field Method. Everybody's doing some form of experiential learning, and we had been doing it in a modest way before that, but we actually created a required course. It runs through the entire first year. It has 3 modules, one of which is to send all 900 students at the same time overseas to work in small groups for companies in emerging market countries. That's a big bet, and it means that we had to scale that operation, and we did so within about 8 months with new technology platforms and whole new management platforms to be able to become a travel agency and an immunization agency and all kinds of stuff. And we learned a lot from doing that, but it was an amazing way to give students an experience that put them out of their comfort zone, putting them in a new market where they had to introduce a product or a service in that market, that they went in thinking they had the right idea and then learned quickly about the challenges of operating in a different environment. So that's a big bet. We also placed a big bet on online learning. I thought Chip was great this morning and really enjoyed what he had to say. our online learning program is actually not targeted to prospective MBAs as much as it's targeted to that person that I said before didn't think about business as a possibility but wants to understand the language of business. So we've invested a lot financially and otherwise in a program called HBX, and that program has actually done well since launch, and I think will continue to evolve. For me, from a marketing perspective, my bet is more along the lines of understanding what kinds of partnerships, co-branding opportunities would make sense for Harvard Business School. It's not something that we engage in frequently. We're very careful and protective of the brand, as you can imagine. But I've been having conversations with LinkedIn and with NPR and Bloomberg and others of that ilk to understand, are there ways that we could work together, strategic ways that we could work together that would benefit both organizations. And those are longer term plays. They may not require a huge financial investment, but they require a big sort of mental investment to get the institution to feel comfortable with it.
That's great. So I would say from a school standpoint at Emory, the business school, we're making big bets on things that don't seem like they should be big bets. They feel like big bets because they're culturally counterintuitive to us. The first is our dean making it very clear that we need to do a better job of being in service to business as a business school, right? We need to make sure that we're thinking about the ways in which our faculty, our research, all of our outputs, our centers, our strategic focus is aimed at how we can impact the business world, not just with the students we graduate, but the knowledge we create and the attention we can place on important topics, which seems like it makes sense, but until you speak it out loud, until you're talking to faculty about, yes, I'm going to take that paper and instead of just doing an abstract, I'm going to translate that whole thing to speak to industry. And I know it's not going to sound or feel good. It's going to be uncomfortable. But it's going to be what lets business understand us better. And so we're trying to do that more and more. The other thing is we've learned how to not make the word millennial a dirty word, right? Millennials get a really bad rap. But they are truly a fantastic population of students that, when spoken to in the right manner, find themselves very drawn to this dirty word of business and a number of things because it's something broken that they feel strongly they can change. Mm-hmm. And so instead of trying to change them to fit to our extremely antiquated education model, we are changing our behemoth dinosaur to fit to a much more nimble audience. And it's painful in a lot of ways, but it's important because in truth, they're not going anywhere and they're not changing. So unless we would like to shut down our operations for the next 15 years until they've moved through, we're going to have to learn to start talking to millennials like the group that they deserve to be spoken to as. And that's really important, explaining why high-performing and high-achieving millennials belong in business school, because through business, you actually can change the world. You don't just have to be a doctor or a lawyer. You can do things through business that are profoundly great and have impact. From a marketing standpoint, we're a very small shop at the business school. And we're a small school, but we're a really small shop. And so the big bet I'm taking now is employing more of the people who own the voice, right? Trying to figure out, how do I get my alumni to speak as advocates on my behalf more consistently? How do I make them go from being graduates to being advocates? How do I take my students and have them tell the story? How do I, dare I say, incentivize them to tell the story so that they can be evangelists about that brand everywhere they go? How do I get my faculty to think about the enterprise of Gosweda Business School and not simply the strain of research that they work in? Again, it sounds common sense, but it is very counterintuitive in the way that higher education works. And so the bet that I have is that by harnessing these resources, I can get more power out of the full enterprise and truly make a cultural change, but it will be uncomfortable in some times.
I guess the example I would have ties into both of these, partnership and the millennial focus, and that's in mobile. We partnered about 3.5, 4 years ago with Adobe to really make a big push into mobile apps at the school, both ones that represent the hallmarks of the brand, but ones that are specific to programs or audiences. And we have 5 apps, and the last one is a student-led virtual tour that for the undergraduate program that we just launched. And the focus on mobile, we think, is really important for a number of reasons. It forces us to think mobile and digital first. It forces us to think about content in a much more interactive, visual way, because that's what that whole touch and discovery on phones and tablets is all about. And it helps us to measure things in a channel that's going to be more and more and more important. It's not going to, the train isn't going to turn around. So that's our big bet. It's also a financial and a strategic move for us to continue down this path, because it requires new resources and new partnerships. But that's kind of what we've mapped out as something that we think it's going to start slow, but for us, but it's going to become increasingly important to the majority of the students that we interact with.
That's great. Well, we are completely out of time.
We have 37 seconds.
36 seconds to go. Yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to have the three of you share your insights and your day-to-day challenges and how you're thinking through to find these opportunities. So we really appreciate your time. Please join me in thanking our partners.